Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Delivering Activities from RealCare Curriculum Online. It is 11, so we will get started. My name is Emily Klinsky. I am on the marketing team here at Realityworks. Presenting today, we have Denise Dubois, our RealCare product manager. Denise has been with Realityworks for 10 years and is a frequent presenter, trainer, and blogger for all things related to RealCare Baby and other related products. Denise has over 20 years of education, marketing, and product design and curriculum writing experience, so she is a great resource for today's presentation. Before we get started, I wanted to cover a couple things. First, today's presentation is going to be recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to that recording, as well as handouts that Denise will be referring to during the presentation. We will have time at the end for any questions, so if you have any questions during the presentation, please jot those down and we will go over those at the end. With that being said, I'm going to pass things over to Denise. So thank you, Denise.
Welcome to today's webinar on delivering activities from the RealCare curriculum online. Now, we know that we are living in very different times than a few months ago, and many of us have been challenged to deliver content online to students. We hope to give you just a few ideas for taking the RealCare curriculum and activities into this online delivery format. So here are 4 of the curricula that our RealCare Baby customers have access to, and each has a slightly different focus. Our basic infant care focuses on teaching those childcare career skills. Parenting focuses on children ages 0 through 3 with child development and parenting topics. Healthy Choices focuses more on teen pregnancy prevention and sexual wellness. And then we also do have 1 middle school curricula available to you. It's Life Skills and Healthy Choices for middle school students, or for middle school students. And again, it focuses on relationships, adolescence, puberty, and those types of things. So in all of the curricula, no matter what lesson you look at, each of them follow basically the same lesson template. And all the RealCare curricula follow this template, which includes these 3 sections. It has the focus section that captures students' attention. It's usually the first 5 minutes or so of the lesson. Then you move into the learn section, and that's the guts of the lesson where you're learning those key objectives. And then we usually finish each lesson with a brief summarize or review activity. Oh, it could be a key question, it could be a quiz, but we're wrapping up to make sure that students have learned those key objectives of the lesson. So we're going to take a look at 3 different lessons from the RealCare curricula today and talk about different ways that we could take some of the content that are in these lessons and deliver it in an online format. So the first one we're going to look at today comes from our basic infant care curriculum, and it is the lesson on holding and feeding. Now, before we get the rest of the webinar content, there are 2 important links that I wanted to share with you that are access sites. The first one is the company response to the coronavirus. We have now made all of our curricula and product guides available as a resource for every product that we have. So the screenshot on the right that you see is where we're listing all of the resources on that link, that first link. And when you go to Family Consumer Science, if you scroll down a little bit, that is where you will see a RealCare Baby resources and things. So everything that I talk about today, as far as handouts and activities, you can access from the RealCare curricula link found there. Also, the second link that you see on the screen was one that was provided to you as a baby customer. So again, this will take you to all 4 of those RealCare curricula that we just identified. And at that link, you would have access to the facilitator instructions, the slide presentations, all of the handouts and activities for the students, as well as assessment tools. So this is Basic Infant Care, and here is a list of the lessons found in Basic Infant Care curricula. Now, the curriculum begins by identifying the attributes that are important when working with infants on the job. Then our lessons go into teaching many of the infant caregiving skills lessons. And in many of these lessons, you can actively use your RealCare Babies to practice those transferable career skills with students when you're in an in-class setting. It also includes a very robust health and safety unit teaching over 50 infant safety and first aid topics. But today we're going to talk about sharing some of the activities from the holding and feeding lesson. So if you do not have a RealCare Baby available to you, there's still value in the activities provided in the lesson. And we realize some of you may actually have, some of you instructors may have access to a baby, but certainly students wouldn't at home. So we'll also be talking about how you can be demonstrating using baby while sharing some of the content with your students. So here are the 3 parts of the holding and feeding lesson. And we're going to take a look at each part of the lesson. So we're going to go through the entire lesson and how it could be adapted to an online format. So it begins with the focus activity, which is called the Hold Me activity. And this is a 5-minute activity to engage your students. Now, the purpose of the activity is to have the students consider how frequently an infant must be held in the caregiving process. The activity also gives participants an opportunity to identify any pre-learning questions they might have about holding and feeding an infant. So, if you were in the regular classroom, this would be a think, pair, share type of activity. However, we're not in that environment now. So one way you could do this, first, it starts with brainstorming when and why a caregiver would need to hold or handle an infant as part of caregiving. So you could pose the question. It could be turned into a writing activity, or if you're in a format where you're doing class via video chat, perhaps your students could share their answers orally. Answers could include things like feeding, preparing to change a diaper or clothing, burping, rocking, comforting, placing an infant in a crib or car seat, even a stroller, infant bathtub, even putting it on a blanket on the floor. So anytime an infant needs to be transported to another location would be a good answer from a student. So then you would explain in written format or even a video clip that the infant is totally dependent on the caregiver to move them to another location and to make sure the infant is safe and comfortable. So have your students imagine not being able to move somewhere on their own and not being able to communicate what they need or when they are hungry. Remind them that the infant's only way to communicate hunger or any other needs is to cry. So ask your students then to identify questions they might have about holding, handling, and feeding an infant. You could ask your students to share questions with you in writing. It could be email, discussion thread, or a chat link, and you could respond and address whether they're going to be covered in the lesson or not. And it also gives you an idea of what the types of questions that your students will have on this content so they can be addressed. Now, if you're in a Google Classroom setting, in the classwork section, you could pose questions in this activity to students and get feedback that way. So this short activity, again, kicks the lesson off and helps you understand what students know or don't know about holding and feeding an infant. So the next activity moves into the learn section of the holding and feeding lesson and focuses on the fact that infants rely on adults for their care and nurturing. So a significant part of the care and nurturing is holding and carrying the infant. So your students will learn how to properly pick up and carry an infant and to handle him or her safely. So in a classroom during this part of the lesson, of course, you would have the opportunity to have a baby and have your students be practicing this. But if your students are learning this remotely, they likely won't have a doll or an infant to practice with. So in this case, something you can do is share the slides that you see on the screen. You've got that content available to you. You could even share it if you have an LMS system. You could even take screenshots of the slides and share it with students. And you could also demonstrate creating your own video clip on how to properly pick up an infant who's lying on their back. And so we're going to do that here this morning where we're going to pretend we're taking students through those 3 steps. So I'm going to move part of my screen here to video. And we know you've got many different ways that you could share content with students, and you've got many variations that you're faced with now. You might be in Google Classroom, you might be in an LMS system, you might have access to Zoom, email, blended learning. Well, whatever works in your situation, you can take the content and share it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move to video, and I've got a baby here with me. It's not letting me access my video. One moment, please. My host needs to enable my video capability. So let's see here if I can do that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead with the lesson, just talking about how you would do that. So if you were in a Zoom situation that allowed for video, you would pick the baby up and you would slide one hand under the infant's neck and the other hand under the infant's lower back. You would lean close to the infant, lifting them up and then keeping the infant's head slightly higher than the rest of the body. And you can see those types of pictures on the slides that you'd be sharing with students. And then of course you're going to say, make sure to support that head until, when putting them down, until it touches the mattress or an infant seat when lying them down. So you could create your own video clip doing something like that. Another thing you could do is show your RealCare Baby lying on its stomach. And again, you'd want to demonstrate how to properly pick that infant up when it's lying on his or her stomach. So you could explain the following steps. Gently roll the infant over onto its back. Proceed with the steps to pick up an infant who's lying on its back. So those are the types of things, if you had video capability, that you could show. You could even make your own video clip that way. Or if you don't have video capability, again, share pictures of it from contents on the slide and things like that. All right, so the next part of the lesson is explaining that if an infant is improperly picked up, it can develop something called nursemaid's elbow, which is a common condition where the radius, which is one of the bones in the forearm, slips out of place from where it normally attaches to the elbow joint. Now, this occurs when an infant or a small child is pulled too hard by the hand or wrist, picked up by an arm, or lifted in the air by the arms. And it can be prevented by lifting and handling an infant or a small child. Very carefully. Don't pull on an infant or small child by the wrists or the hands, and also gently grasp a toddler or young child under the arms or around the body. So in the lesson, then the next bit of content focuses on how to hold an infant properly. So again, you've got the three types of holds on the slide in front of you. We've got the cradle hold, the shoulder hold, and the football hold. And again, if you had video capability, you would go ahead and enable your video. You could create a video clip that way showing these three types of holds. My video is not working right now, so I'm going to explain each of them, but this is good to show you. If you don't have video capability, you can still show the pictures and do an oral or description of how to do it. So the cradle hold, which is of course most common, is where you place the infant's head in the curve of your elbow and use your forearm to support the body. Then for the shoulder hold, you place the infant's head gently on your shoulder and you use one hand to support the head and the other to support the body. Now the football hold is where you place the infant's head lying face up in your hand and the body lying along your pointed toward your elbow. So those are the three ways you could do it, but always it's important to support the head, neck, and the back. So the next section of the lesson ends with a question. Now you could ask the students, why is it important to support an infant's head and neck? Now you could send this out as a quick discussion thread or an email for a quick answer, or in Google Classroom. Again, you could post that question in the classroom section. Suggested answers would be the head is too big for the body and the neck is weak. So there's different ways you can engage your students by asking questions throughout the lesson. So use RealCare Baby though, if you have it available to you as the teacher, even if your students don't. Demonstrate those infant caregiving skills in those lessons, such as holding, handling, feeding, burping, rocking. But there are also ways to get your students to see that type of footage without your demonstration. And that would be showing the RealCare Baby video. It's on the URL that you see on the screen in front of you. It's a 9-minute video that you have access to, and it shows the students all 4 care events, including burping, feeding, rocking, and changing. Now, URLs or links like this can be posted on an LMS system and in Google Classroom in the classwork section to share. So an easy way to get your students to actually see RealCare Baby doing all of the care events. Another way that you could do that is have your students access our free RealCare Baby Guide app on their cell phone. If they go to the App Store and they put in RealCare Baby Guide, there's a free app for Android and iPhone users. And on that app are 4 video clips showing the 4 care events: the burping, the feeding, the rocking, and the changing. So in the holding and feeding lesson, you could certainly point your students toward watching the clip for the burping, rocking, and the feeding. And that would be great footage for them to see. Also, if you look on YouTube, there are dozens and dozens of infant caregiving videos out there specific to holding and feeding and handling an infant. So videos are a great way to engage your students and to get them to see things in action, even if they can't see you in a classroom. Now, the second part of this lesson focuses specifically on feeding as an important caregiving event. So students will learn how to properly hold the infant while feeding it. They will also learn about the methods of burping and the differences between breastfeeding and bottle feeding. So in a classroom, you'd usually give students, that RealCare Baby to practice with, but however, you can still remotely go over this content online. If you have RealCare Baby to demonstrate with, that's great. You could show a feeding or again, one of the video clips. But if you don't have that, you could first of all give your students a copy of the bottle preparation and bottle feeding handouts that are in the basic infant care curricula. And you could send these to students via email, or you could post it in an LMS system. We'll of course be providing these in PDF to you after the webinar, but you do have access to those. And then you could share the content found in slides 4 and 5 that you have on the screen in front of you. And these discuss all the steps to bottle preparation and then bottle safety. So going through that content, making it available online, will give students the information that they need on that. Then you could also share these next few slides on how to properly feed an infant. And again, you could use RealCare Baby to verbally explain the different steps that go on. And then share these steps. These are in the lesson. Say, hold the infant in the cradle hold, ensuring that his or her head is above the rest of the body as you feed it. Test the bottle temperature by placing a few drops of the contents on the inside of your wrist. Hold the bottle to the infant's mouth at a 45-degree angle to limit the air bubbles, and then periodically stop to give the infant time to rest and burp. And then on slide 7, explain, and if you can, demonstrate the 3 methods of burping an infant. So again, you could verbally also explain these. Hold the infant upright against your chest with his or her head on your shoulder and pat the back lightly and gently. Sit the infant on your lap, leaning him or her slightly forward with your hand, supporting his or her upper body, and pat the back gently. And the third way is to lay the infant on your lap on his or her belly and pat the back gently. So all of this content and explanation you have available to you in the facilitator guide in the holding and feeding lesson. So then we move on to the next bit of content, which is responding to crying. So it's really important for students to understand that it's important to respond to an infant's hunger cries as soon as possible. This prevents the infant from working him or herself into more of a frenzy. It also lets the infant know that he can trust that you will meet his or her needs, and that when he communicates, and there's a good result. So remember, crying is the only infant's way to communicate. You can't spoil an infant. So that's the kind of content that you can share with your students verbally. In writing, you can share the slide content that you see on the slides in front of you, posting it to them so that they read it as material. Another thing you'll want to share with them is try to detect the infant's different cries. Determine if something other than food is needed to avoid feeding every time they cry. They'll learn that food is for nutrition and not just for comfort. So then you can ask your participants what they think the definition and cause is of baby bottle tooth decay. So you'd share slide 11, which talks about that, and discuss it briefly. You'd give each of the students a copy of the breastfeeding facts and formula feeding facts handouts from the lesson. These again will be provided to you, and they can also be found in the lesson in basic infant care on holding and feeding. So in the next slides, share this content with your students about breastfeeding versus formula feeding. And there are handouts in the lesson. One is called Information for Babysitting and Child Care Participants that speaks about spoon feeding slightly older babies as well. So all of these handouts can be found in the lesson, and you could post them again in the LMS system. You could email them. There's lots of different ways that you can get that content out to students. Then there's something called the breastfeeding versus formula feeding worksheet. And this is one where you'd actually have students fill in all of the quadrants on that handout. And here's what that handout looks like. Students could complete this and submit it to you, or if you have difficulty accessing the curricula, students could simply make their own table, labeling it as such, and submit it to you. If you have something on your computer called a snipping tool, you could even get a screenshot and send that out to students as well. So once you've gone through the slide content and the lesson content, this is an activity that your students can complete, so you can check for understanding. And then here's the review activity at the end that reinforces what they've learned during the lesson. So again, you have access to this in the curricula. You could send it to students or give them access to the worksheet in some manner. So you don't have to have access. You could just post some of the following questions to the students via email or on a chat board in your LMS system or in Google Classroom. These could be key questions that could be a writing exercise that students turn into you. So here's some of the questions that you could post to them. And again, if you're in a situation where you've got Zoom or you can do live teaching via video to the class, you could ask these questions orally and they could respond to you orally as well. So question 1, what do you need to support when holding or handling an infant? Answer, back, neck, and head. What are 3 ways to hold an infant? The answer would be the cradle, the shoulder, and the football holds. Why should you respond to an infant's hunger cries as soon as possible? The answer could be, it prevents the infant from working him or herself into a frenzy, but it also lets the infant know that he can trust you, you will meet his needs when he communicates, and there will be a good result. What are 3 methods for burping an infant? Over the shoulder, on your lap, over the knees, and sitting the infant up on your lap. What is nursemaid's elbow? Answer, one of the bones in the infant's forearm slips out of place. It can occur when a child is pulled too hard by the hand or wrist, picked up by one arm, or lifted in the air by the arms. What are the advantages of breast milk versus formula? Answer, convenience. It's free, sanitary, infection fighting, easy to digest, correct temperature, cannot overfeed, less likely to become or to cause allergic reactions, and promotes bonding with the mother. What are the advantages of formula versus breast milk? It can provide a shared feeding experience, flexibility, the mom's diet is not as much a concern, and less frequent feedings. What causes baby bottle tooth decay? The answer, when any liquid other than water sits in the infant's mouth too long, causing the cavities in the baby's teeth. I'm going to pause here to see. We will be taking a Q&A at the end here. So we're going to go ahead and look at a lesson from our parenting curriculum. Again, this curriculum focuses on topics ages 0 to 3. We are going to look specifically at lesson 9 from this curricula, and that is the lesson on parenting styles. Now, this is not a lesson where you typically use baby as a hands-on demonstration tool. However, there are some good activities in it that will show you how to take online and use. So this lesson will begin with a parenting style self-quiz. And of course, we'll be providing this to you as a PDF, but you also do have access at those links. Then the next part, students learn about the impact or the effect of the 4 different parenting styles that they have on a child. And then the last activity in the lesson is where students have to identify natural versus logical consequences for a variety of scenarios. So this kicks off the lesson, and this is the parenting style self-quiz. Now, the self-quiz gives your students a chance to critically think about their own parenting styles and biases, if any. So you'll be provided with a PDF, or you can access it yourself via the links. You could email this to students to work on individually. You could post it to your LMS system. Even in something like a Google Classroom, you could create this and post it as a quiz for students to take. That would require you to retype the self-quiz that you see here, but it's one way you could do it. If you're able to teach a class live online, you could simply read each of the 10 scenarios off, and you have your students write down their answers. They choose from letters A through D. So that is what the parenting style self-quiz looks like. Now, when students have compiled their self-tests and you can share the following information with them. If you're able to take screenshots and post this to your LMS system for students to self-assess, that's great. There's 4 different slides that are available, and each of them tells the student what it means. If their answers that they chose were mostly A's, B's, C's, or D's. So you can see the first 2 slides on here speak to the attributes of permissive and authoritarian parenting styles and all about those. And then the other 2 are the C and D answers, which are authoritative and uninvolved. So you could actually pull all 4 of the content from these slides, take snips and create a PDF doc by cutting and pasting and sending that out. Students really enjoy seeing what their parenting style is and kind of what they gravitate toward. Another way you could do it is create a short video of you discussing each of those 4 parenting styles orally, and then you could share that information with them as well. So there's different ways, again, that you can present that content. This is a really fun way to use videos. There are many different videos on YouTube that speak specifically to parenting styles, and I've chosen just a few of my favorites. The first and the third links on here actually take video clips from popular TV shows and movies, and weave in different scenarios and have students watch them and try to identify the parenting styles from that. The middle link that I'm sharing is from a TED Talk, again, all about the different parenting styles. But there are more than just these 3 if you go on YouTube. But again, I think students really will enjoy seeing parenting styles snipped out of movies they might have seen or popular TV shows. So you can embed URLs and links into your LMS system for your students to watch. You could even give your students an option to choose which video they want to view on parenting styles. So here's just a few examples, but there are certainly a lot more out there that you could access and share with your students. So the next part of the lesson is about parenting style outcomes. So now that students have learned about their own parenting style tendencies, they'll learn about the effect of the 4 parenting styles, the effect that they have on a child. So some are more positive than others, and they'll learn about that. So in the curriculum, there is something that you'd access called the Nurturing Parent Skills Worksheet. You could send it to the student or post it, or instruct students to even draw their own large square grid labeling the 4 quadrants that you see here on the right. And then your students will also need access to the list of parenting outcomes provided on the handout on the left. If you're having difficult accessing the lessons in the parenting curriculum, you could simply type this list out and provide it to students via email or, again, somewhere on your LMS system. But what they're supposed to do is take each of the outcomes that are on the list and place it in the quadrant in the Nurturing Parent Skills Worksheet where they think it fits best. So they write it in there, they complete it, and then they submit it to you so you can see it's been completed. Now, if you're in a situation where you're able to Zoom real time with your whole class, you could just have your students weigh in on each of those outcomes verbally, or having the class come to a consensus while you write it into a master Nurturing Parent Skills worksheet. So different ways that you could do that part of the lesson. And then the very last activity in this lesson is where students have to identify natural versus logical consequences for a variety of scenarios. So you would make the natural versus logical consequences worksheet available to each of your students, or in lieu of that, you could just share the slide that you see on the screen in front of you, and students could write down their answers and submit them in writing. Now on the worksheet, there's a worksheet in the that's available. There's an example on that worksheet that shows what are natural consequences and what are logical consequences, because we want to help students understand the difference between the 2 of those so that they're able to complete this exercise. So you could have students choose one of the scenarios, and you could even have them record and submit their own video clip of a natural consequence and a logical consequence that they act out. Students love to use their phones for things like this, so that could be really fun. Or they could even use their siblings maybe as actors. You could even allow students to come up with their own situation and scenario and record a natural versus a logical consequence for that situation. You could invite your students to submit their video clips in a shared space if possible. And I believe things like Moodle, Blackboard, and Google Classroom have settings where students can share and view files. So that's one way you could do that. Now, prior to working on this activity, in the curriculum itself, in the facilitator instructions, there's a short informational paragraph that you could make available for your students to read. You could copy paste it and share it. And in Google Classroom, that's where you could put it in the materials section, or if you wanted to, you could share it orally or record it as a video clip and make it available on your LMS system. So I'm gonna share it now. It's just a brief paragraph so you know what the content says. It says, limit setting is crucial for child development. Children are initially upset when parents cannot say yes to every request. However, setting limits allows a child to grow a sense of reserve, which is necessary for safety, social acceptance, and healthy living. Human desire is for instant gratification, yet if we always gave in to this desire, we would have long-term dissatisfaction. A few results of living without ever saying no to ourselves and others are potentially obesity, poverty, limited education, violence, increased stress, and many other undesirable consequences. Parents that want to only please children want to gain the love of their child by always saying yes. What these parents don't realize is that they may be hurting their child in the long run, and the child will likely realize that as an adult, who will eventually have to learn to say no to themselves, they'll also have to live with those consequences. And this could cause a real relationship breakdown at a later age. So parents need to support for when they have to say no to a child, and they need to do it in a way that conveys the message to the child that they are loved and respected. So that's something that could be content that you post and share with your students. Now, the third lesson example that we wanted to share today with you comes from our Healthy Choices curriculum that focuses on teen prevention and sex education and wellness. And here's a list of all the lessons in your Healthy Choices list of lessons. We are going to do the lesson highlighting the cost of a baby. Most students really have no clue of what it costs to care for an infant in that first year. So this is a great lesson and a great reality check. So this lesson focuses on exactly how much having a baby costs. The lesson is primarily a research project where students go out and they find the costs associated with that first year of caring for an infant, and then the debrief is at the end. So this one is again found in your Healthy Choices curriculum. And the lesson kicks off with a probing question. How much do you think it costs to have a baby the first year? And have your students guess. You want them to submit in writing to you how much they think that first year total costs. And then say, okay, how much for 18 years? Again, have them try to guess that. You could pose the question to students and have them submit answers to you before they begin that research activity, because we want to really see how much do they think, and then they're going to learn about the reality of it, and you're going to ask the question again at the end. So again, they should submit their answer to you. It could be an email, some other way of writing, but they should submit that to you. So you can tell your students that you're going to share the before and after comparisons with them at the end of the lesson. So you're going to give each student access to the 3-page baby costs worksheet that you have access to, and it's on the screen here in front of you. This is a perfect research project for students to do online, and students are responsible for researching the cost of each item on the list and documenting it. It's also a good math lesson because at the end, they have to figure out the cost for an infant for an entire year. And then you'll have your students turn in their findings about the costs that they researched and exactly what they found. Compare the results of the numbers students found in their research with the original projections. And if you wanted to, you could even prepare a before and after class chart to show just how far off or how close some of the students were. So it's a great reality check. Another thing you can do is create a game like The Price is Right and have students use their research results to play along and see how they do. So you could do it a couple different ways. First of all, you could do a search for The Price is Right PowerPoint template. And I have a couple of them on the screen here, a couple links that I found. Some are free, some are very low cost, but they're templates available for your use. However, if you want to keep it just very, very simple, you could create your own slide deck. And then you could post this for students to access and go through independently. So if you want to create your own, you choose about 20 to 30 baby items students would have had to research on their baby costs worksheet. And then you create the high-low game. On each slide, on each single slide, you put a photo of a baby item that they would have researched, and you make up a price. And then, but you also know what the real price is. Now, students are to guess if the actual retail price of the item is higher or lower than the price you have on the slide. And you have all that information and you know what it is. So they should keep a running tally for each item, higher or lower, and then turn that in at the end. This is if students want to do it as a self-paced activity, that would be one way you could do it. So create your slides, make them have access. But if you're able to do this live with an online class, you could show the item, have your students write down their answers simultaneously and before moving on to the next slide. We all know students love video games and gamification, so it could be a simple but interactive way to make the content that they've just researched more fun and to apply. And then the final summarized thing here are a series of reflective questions for the end of the Cost of a Baby lesson. These reflection questions could be used for a class discussion. It could be a discussion in a chat area followed by a writing assignment of one written paragraph per question if you wanted. Some of these questions are, what kind of financial choices do responsible or mature parents make? What kind of time management choices do responsible mature parents make? How do our society and culture influence how people parent? So have your students think about the expectations there are for money and material possessions. How does the media's portrayal of roles and responsibilities of parenting impact that? What is the impact of divorce and single parenting on wages, education level, cost of living, so forth? You could also present information on where parents can go to get community help and support when needed. There are many local agencies, government grants, church programs and things like that that assist low-income parents with housing, food, and education. You can note that while assistance is very helpful, it often does not provide enough funds to live a comfortable lifestyle. It's just the bare basics. Or alternatively, you could task each student to research and find one local community resource available to assist low-income parents. And they submit their findings to you. You compile the list and create a master list of all the local things and then share it with students. Now, if you're able to have a class discussion, you could continue by asking some more questions. Again, if you can't do this live, you could post these questions in a discussion board or chat room. You could ask more questions. How can parents save money when purchasing infant items? So they can be thinking back to all the research they did. Do you think your parents made sacrifices for you when you were a young infant? Explain. Do you think parents or guardians make sacrifices for you today? Explain your answer. So you might even think of more probing questions that could wrap up what they learned about the cost of a baby, especially in that first year. So you could pose the questions to them and have them reflect on each of them, writing an answer for each of them, or maybe they write a more detailed answer to one of their choice. Another optional class activity that you could do with this lesson is an interview with a teen parent. So one of the most powerful messages about how a baby changes your lives actually comes from young teenage mothers and fathers who are living or have lived the experience. So if you are aware of a young teen mother or father who is comfortable sharing their story, you could invite them to do so. It could be the form of you inviting them in to do a short interview with them. You could capture that on video. You could share it via Zoom. You could bring them in for a class Q&A. You could invite your students to submit questions that they have for the interview ahead of time that you could then ask. So there's ways that you could also weave something like that into a lesson on the cost of an infant. So those are just 3 lessons that we've shared today from 3 different curricula that go along with RealCare Baby. While these lessons were made for more of the traditional classroom setting, there are hundreds of pages of content and activities and resources, from slides to assessments to all sorts of things that you have available to you. So if you are now finding yourself in an online teaching environment and wanting more activities and more content and ideas, go to the RealCare Curricula. You will not have to reinvent the wheel. You might have to be creative depending on what your teaching environment is, and see the tools that you have available and see how you could take blocks of this content and bring it and make it available to students and some of the activities. If you want to see more of our classroom resources, we have our Realityworks.com website is on there. One thing we wanted to point out to you, that if you are a RealCare Baby customer user, right now we do have our $50 trade-in going on for the purchase of new infant simulators. We know that at some point we are all going to be back in the classroom. So if you are looking for upgrading your babies at this point and trading in the old one, now might be a great time to consider doing that. So at this point, we would really like to open it up to Q&A now. And Emily is our moderator, and she's going to share some of the questions that have come up in our chat section during the webinar. Emily?
Yeah, so one of the questions that we got, Denise, was, can this program be implemented in middle school?
Yes, we do have the Life Skills and Healthy Choices for middle school students curricula that was written by middle school teachers for middle school students. And I'd say the youngest age that's usually taught at is 7th, more often 8th grade. But there's, I think, anywhere from 15 to 20 lessons. And you can access it via the links I shared at the beginning of the webinar. And you can go into each individual lesson and check it out.
Awesome. And then regarding the curriculum, do they have to register for a curriculum?
No. They just go to those links and it's immediately available for them to click on and to view and to use.
All right. It looks like many people have questions about digital copies right now regarding our curriculum. Do you have any answers for them on that?
As far as what the permissions are with copyright and such,
Yes.
here's the situation. We know right now we are in an extraordinary time. And if you are a RealCare Baby customer and you have access to the curricula, you may take the assets in the curricula and make them work for your situation. So if that means taking a quiz or something and retyping it and putting it into your LMS or doing something different with it, that is just fine. We know that you have to teach your students. And so we want to help you in any way that we can. So right now, as long as you are just using the content that's copyrighted from all our curricula, and you're using it for educational purposes and not for commercial use, that is just fine.
Okay. And then is there any way we can get more types of these webinars to help us in the future?
Yes, we are in the midst of planning the next couple webinars that we want to do in the next few weeks. And following this webinar, Emily's going to be sending you a very brief evaluation to complete. And one of the questions is, what other topics do you want to see for webinars? And we are going to be looking at that list that you tell us what you want. And those are the ones that we are going to be developing. The next one that I know for sure that we're going to be doing is going to focus on some of our geriatric content that we have in some of our geriatric simulation products. And some FACS teachers and have RealCare Baby also have those. But if there are some other specific RealCare topics that you want us to cover in an upcoming webinar, please let us know.
All right, Denise, they have one more question. They're wondering about if we can make these into Google Docs for them.
We don't have a Google Classroom account here, but they have our permission to take the content and put them into and create a Google Doc from the content that we've provided. So they can do, like I said, they can do screenshots. If it has to retype it to create the quiz and that kind of thing, you can do that. That's just not a service that we're able to provide here at our office, because right now no one is working at our office. But you have the content and you can make it into any Google Docs that you would need in order to present that content.
Good. Well, I think that is all the questions that we have for today. Oh, we have questions about will we be allowed access to the recording of this presentation? Yes, we will be sending out a recording of that.
Yeah, we'll be sending the recording and then PDFs of the 8 or 9 different specific handouts I spoke about in the curriculum. But again, a reminder, you do have access to that and everything else in the curriculum. Any additional questions, Emily?
Oh, they were asking about the websites that you mentioned at the beginning. Do we have those in link format for them?
We can include that in the email that you send out that has the recording link. I can make sure and get that to you so that you can put that in the email. Yes, we can.
All right. Well, I think that is all the questions that we have for today. So that concludes today's presentation. Thank you all for attending. Please keep an eye out on your email for that recording link, as well as the survey that Denise mentioned that we will be sending out. We would love your feedback and to see what other webinars that you are looking for. We hope everyone is safe and healthy and have a great rest of your day.